Hello, and thank you for choosing to hit play on this recording today. My name is Jodie Martin, and I'm presenting on behalf of my colleagues Kelly Shoecraft and Greta Paris on something we created called the Academic Register Framework. I'm located in Vancouver, Canada at the University of British Columbia at Vantage College, and a couple of years ago I was working with Kelly Shoecraft and Greta Paris, and that's what we're talking about today. Kelly's now in Brisbane, Australia at Griffith University, while Greta is doing her PhD at the University of British Columbia. The program we taught in is called the Vantage One Science Program, and it's important to understand how it works, to understand how we were able to do what we did. So the program is an enriched program for first year international science students who haven't quite met the requirements for direct entry in terms of language. Their first year science program is spread out over 3 terms instead of 2, and they have 2 academic English courses that they take for the first 2 terms, which are based on systemic functional grammar and genre-based pedagogy. The course we're talking about today comes in the second term after students have had an introduction to systemic functional grammar and is called Critical Reading and Writing in Academic and Professional Registers. What we did was introduce a research focus on discourse analysis for students to investigate academic and professional registers and then learn to write about that through their research writing. So first year international science students, we had to constrain the projects a little bit. Students chose one language feature that they had previously learnt about and compared its use in 2 different texts. So a academic and non-academic text, or maybe 2 sections of the same text, like the introduction and methods. And they chose language features like nominalization, process types, and theme patterns. The assessment for this program was a 1,500-word research project following a basic introduction, method, results, discussion structure. And it's important to note that the basis of achievement was this writing about research rather than the actual analysis. And nevertheless, we had to help them do the analysis in order to write about it as it went on. So this was really interesting because now they were doing analysis of language features for the purpose of developing their own language learning and language ability. The challenge was that we had students doing discourse analysis. They were novice to analysis in general in terms of being quite new to linguistics. There were also international students with English as an additional language, and there were science students rather than linguists or communication students. But we knew we needed to help scaffold them to interpret and discuss the findings that they had generated, and that there was a real risk of students failing to wave up in their writing to be able to interpret those. Now, what do I mean by waving up? You may be familiar with the notion from legitimation code theory of semantic waves. I won't go into too much detail, but the basic idea is that if up top we have our abstract concepts and technical ideas, and down bottom we have our specific examples and data and concrete things, successful language use so often involves moving smoothly between one point and another and back again. But we know that it's a lot easier to unpack a concept with an example than to move up from examples to concepts, at least for students. And so this is where we wanted to help them. Another example in a visualization now, you can see from the slides that I used with my class. If an introduction section, we would expect it to wave around the middle, to have concepts but not too abstract, and examples but not too specific. And as they move through the methods and results section, they get more concrete, more specific as they say exactly what they did and exactly what they found. And this critical point of hitting the discussion was where you have to be able to both generalize from your findings into patterns and connect to broader ideas, but also give us examples so that we know that you know what you're talking about. Waving up is a challenging thing to do. Interpreting findings is challenging at the best of times. We all know that. We've done research where we thought we knew what we were talking about and we went to write about the discussion and we were writing about something else. An additional challenge in this context was students had done quantitative investigation, counted the number of language features and so on, and looked at the frequency. And we really needed to use qualitative interpretations because their data sets were so small we couldn't use quantitative interpretation methods like statistics. So we use two pedagogical tools to help scaffold this interpretation, both the research process of interpreting data and the writing practice of writing an interpretation of data. And these two tools were the semantic waves, which we did teach the students directly, as well as this academic register framework, which we developed to help students with that wave up movement by knowing exactly what to connect their findings to. So what do I mean by register? We wanted register because it provided that intermediary stage between the lexicogrammatical features that they were studying and that they had learnt about, and those more general genre concepts of purpose of text and particularly audience and so on. Having to access the field tenor and mode to understand that these texts were about a topic and by a person, and how those variables would influence the language use and also explain the language use that they found was really important, and would also help them transfer that knowledge further. So we generated the academic register framework to provide something that the students could access to interpret their findings, that condensed a lot of common knowledge from teaching, the research and so on in a simple format that they could access and understand. And it was designed to be a series of continua, and emphasizing that language is not a binary of right and wrong or this or that, but a continuum of different effects and configurations and context variables that could be variously emphasized or not, or activated or not. And that was a way to understand the language use. We started by aligning the language features under a continuum of less academic to more academic. And you can see from this slide from, I think it was my second year, we built on that previous work in their previous course of understanding how these language features help their writing become more academic. Now, obviously, getting more academic is not purely linear, and there's multiple ways of being and writing academic, but this helped describe a continuum rather than a binary of right or wrong. We then aligned the different register variables under this continuum. It's a bit rough, but it helps. And we grabbed any of the continua that we thought were relevant to our students, knowing their projects, knowing their understandings, knowing the research and what they needed to talk about and interpret those findings. And I'll present each of the meta functions separately. You can also see on screen the adapted meta language that was used with the students for the meta functions. So the framework has that less academic, more academic continuum at the top, along with some patterns like the quantitative indicators of lexical density and grammatical intricacy. And then the rest are divided between the meta functions under the notions of field, tenor and mode. So for field, we just focused on the everyday, specialist or technical continuum to highlight how the language features were helping a text be more or less technical. And so a lot of this is stuff that they had been taught previously, like the use of relational processes or more nominalization and expanded noun groups. This is drawing on what they'd been taught, drawing on literature, a little bit drawing on intuition, such as the part on circumstances where it's based on Jennifer Walsh-Mara and my early work on circumstances, which definitely needs more research. And this helps them align their findings to the notion of specialist and technical, to the notion of more academic. For interpersonal positioning or tenor, this is a good example of how the framework let us be modular. There were a lot of variables that were relevant, and in our first year, only that bottom line was present with interactional resources from Highland's work in EAP. But in my second year, I added and taught my students about appraisal, but I still had students who'd learnt only the interactional resources. So being able to put them all together and align them to show different usage was really helpful and important. And being able to negotiate how a text could be formal but still more subjective or interactive and so on, and understand those different variables having different impacts on language was really useful. Lastly, mode. Mode was actually the main driver for generating this framework. I remember Greta and I talking about students comparing spoken and written texts, and that we really needed something accessible for them to understand the mode continuum of more speech-like and more writing-like. But at the same time, so many students were studying TED Talks and comparing them with academic texts. And TED Talks are speech, but they're highly polished and organized. So being able to understand the different impacts this has on language was really useful. And under mode, you can see theme patterns and so on, but you can also see genres and staging. This was how genres were presented to the students the previous year as part of the textual meta function. So overall, we found that the academic register framework helps students move from that quantitative analysis in their findings, in their results and methods, counting the language features and quantifying them, to a qualitative interpretation, understanding the context and those variables overall. So partly this was through scaffolding awareness of the process of interpretation, how language features can map to variables and so on. It also gave them the specific vocabulary to use that they could use in their texts, and we told them they didn't need to cite the register framework this time. It also guided them on the type of concepts to use. So students who didn't use this specific language still used similar language that they found in literature that they did read and did access. And so the academic register framework helped to form those high points on the semantic wave in the students' writing of their discussion sections, helped them to connect their findings to those bigger concepts and ideas. So I'll show you now an example from one of the students who focused on comparing theme patterns in chemistry, and they compared an academic register article with an article for a general audience. And I'll show you 2 paragraphs from their discussion section. So I won't go through it in detail, you can pause if you want, but in teal you can see the academic register framework terms highlighted there at the top and at the bottom, as well as in yellow those genre concepts of purpose and audience also present at either end of the paragraph. And if we try and do a semantic wave analysis, and I've used semantic gravity coding in the top left-hand corner key, you can see the paragraph starts with this description of the text and the analysis that the student did, moves up using those references to academic and theme patterns to an interpretation, the concepts and how they're used in general, what the impacts are, back down to examples from the text, and in other students' work that we had quotes of specific examples, harder to do with theme patterns. Back up again to talk about the impact being technical and specific, and then back down again to segue to the next paragraph. So we can see the academic register framework helping the students to move not down and up, but up and down and up and down, which is definitely successful in what we wanted them to do. If we pull out a sentence from that, we can see this connection more clearly. So the result is not surprising because text A is a more academic language. Great contribution of thematic patterns is expected. Now this is a bit of a close claim. We would normally expect a reference, but we told them they didn't need to cite the register framework. And if we look at the register framework, we can see that alignment of more academic associated with the use of theme patterns from the mode module of the framework. Turning to the next paragraph, the student now turned from the relative use of theme patterns in the academic and non-academic text to the type of theme patterns used. And here is really quite interesting because they make the connection between theme patterns and the use of relational processes. And again, making those connections with the academic framework language, the academic register framework language, as well as the genre concepts that they'd been taught the previous term. And turning to a semantic analysis, we've now got even more abstract claims. So starting with that text analysis claim of the percentages and findings, to an interpretation from the literature and beyond the text or the text type that they're talking about, drawing on that literature citation there. Back down to analysis of the text with a description, a very specific description, and then generalizing that, looking at the impact for first one text and then another, and really tapping into an understanding of the impact of language use in general. And this is a good example of showing how the academic register framework is modular, but can also be holistic. Instead of having a segmental approach to the meta functions, we can bring them together and see how they interrelate and connect. So the student in this sentence writes, the data or the use of theme patterns could be explained by text A is an academic text. High use of relational process is more likely to be seen in the text. So here they've seen that alignment of academic and relational processes and theme patterns, but also understanding that this text was a descriptive text, so used a lot of relational processes to define and describe something, and had that repetition of the subject to form that reiterative linear theme pattern. For the non-academic text, they connect instead now to the tenor notion of interactivity to describe the use of zigzag theme patterns. And I wouldn't say this is the best description, but we really appreciate that students at this level can understand that that zigzag theme pattern is moving the reader through an explanation and understanding, is engaging the reader, and so interactive is a good connection to make for how the language is used and why it is used in that way. So the academic register framework overall is a customizable and adaptable framework. So I was able to expand it in my second year after my colleagues left, and adapt it to the other course I teach to attend to those needs. It's modular. We can take each module separately, but yet it's still holistic. Having all of the language features on a 1 to 2 page reference that the students could refer to or consult, or I could point to with the students, was really valuable. It does require mediation from the instructor. It's important to understand that it doesn't mean that most academic is good and they should always use only features of the most academic, but understand them as a continuum, as a series of variables to be emphasized or not, tuned or not. That's really important. It also can be customized to whatever meta language the teacher has used with the students, whatever concepts the students actually know. It, to our surprise, provided useful feedback on writing to students. So being able to say, not that you've used this language feature which is wrong, but by using these 3 together, you're pulling it in this direction, you're making it seem less formal, you're making it seem less academic. Gave them the option of strategic language use and helped to move beyond that right-wrong binary. It also was useful for scaffolding other language use. So for example, I had a focus on presentations in my other course particularly, and presenting them with this framework helped us try to configure how do we do a presentation that's informal on a topic versus one that's academic but still speech-like, polished but not everyday. More everyday but not too everyday. It was a really useful framework to work from. So the academic register framework is a pedagogical tool first and foremost, and helps with discourse analysis by novice analysts, which was what it was originally designed for. But furthermore, it offers writing support for academic writing, not only with English as an additional language students like we're working with here. It also provides an additional scaffold for shared meta-language, providing that framework for aligning everything the students had learnt and giving a reference that they can use and operate and work with in their own drafting and writing was productive. The design of the framework was very much drawing on Suzanne Egan's book, The Introduction to Systemic Functional Linguistics, as well as some resources developed from the University of Wollongong Learning Resources Centre and Learning Development. So whoever put them online, thank you very much. We are writing an article about this framework at the moment, so if you're interested in finding out more, please do not hesitate to contact us. Our email addresses and my social media are on the screen. We hope to talk to you more in the Q&A session for the conference, or talk to you generally at the conference or afterwards. Thank you very much for watching.